Look, things are going to be a little choppy for the next little while. There will be a fracturing during this time, during the churning. Panic is probably going to be the first response to some of the stuff that happens. If you can trust that this is going to carry you somewhere, you will get through it easier. Do not fear this mention of churning waters, for churning waters carry you to something much wider and deeper, as all churning waters do. You do not have to join the churning. You do not have to churn yourself just because the external world churns around you. Do not fight the current. The current is working in your favor. Allow yourself to flow with this change. Hey there, welcome to this channel about navigating some turbulence that we are about to step into. If we have not met yet, my name is Sarah, and I get visions and I channel information. And mostly what I've been getting lately is some loving heads up about some stuff we're about to step into, and perhaps more importantly, some wise, loving advice about how to navigate all of that. So today I'll be sharing a channel about this turbulence in the wider world, what my guides refer to as like a season of churning that we're going into. So I will tell you a little bit about that, share the channel, and then I will stay on. I'll come back after the channel and I'm going to walk you through some of it. I'm going to unpack it with you. I've noticed a few themes for what came up in this channel around this time. They talked about churning in the outer world and how important self-trust, returning to self, maintaining your heart space is during this period. And when they're talking about trust, it's not trust in institutions, it's trust in that wiser, deeper part of yourself. They talked about buoyancy, which is probably a word that I wouldn't have chosen, but it's really interesting how they connect the need for buoyancy to this time that we're moving into. And they talk about, eventually, soon-ish, we're going to be moving into a time where people come together and people rise together. But before that happens, there will be a fracturing. So they, again, just giving a little bit of a loving heads up about that, and also a light at the end of the tunnel when, we get to a place where there's more unity. And then they sort of wrap up again by reminding us to tend to our heart energy during this time, during the churning. So this is a channel that I did when I was on a camping trip, and I just put my phone recorder in my lap, and so you'll see the lovely canopy of maple leaves above me, and you will also see the occasional, my arm comes into the shot when I'm swatting away bugs. So this is the channel now. I hope you enjoy, and I will be back to unpack it for you at the end.
The energy is moving fast right now. The energy is moving fast, but in short bursts. So you do not see how fast it is moving, so as to not overwhelm. Humans are overwhelmed easily by change, by movement. Movement is oftentimes very good, and yet we want to relay the message that great care has been taken with this movement so as to reduce, limit, soften, overwhelm. Think back to the period of time 4 years ago, the fast moving energy of 4 years ago, when things appeared to turn on a dime. Panic was present for many. Panic is the normal, typical response for humans in change. It is not wrong or bad, but there is an easier way. Trust. Trust is an easier way. Trust is a brighter North Star for change. Trust helps to trust helps to calm the navigation of change. It may not calm the waters of change. The waters may remain the same, but navigation is easier with trust. We wish to encourage trust at this time. Trust when the outer world at large appears chaotic, appears fractured, appears violent, appears harsh. We wish to encourage trust during this phase. We encourage trust because it will not be the first response. The first response will be contraction, fear. Again, this is natural, but less helpful. Why trust? Trust opens a trust opens the flow of change. It opens the conduit to let things flow more easily. Surrendering to change is sometimes perceived as passive. We suggest that surrender is a deeply active undertaking. It is the undertaking of release. Why release in change? Release allows one to be more fluid, to be carried by the current of change instead of to fight it. It allows buoyancy during a time of churning, of turbulence. Buoyancy is a more desirable state to be in when the waters churn. And do not fear this mention of churning waters, for churning waters carry you to something much wider and deeper, as all churning waters do. But to get lost in the churning would be myopic. To get lost in the churning would be to forget the wider, deeper waters where they are carrying you. Yes, this journey to wider, deeper waters is rocky at times, but you will be carried. We repeat, you will be carried. Do not fight the current. The current is working in your favor. You fear drowning, but the current is working in your favor. Allow yourself to flow with this change. This phase of change, yes, feels turbulent, feels chaotic. You can feel the churning. You do not have to join the churning. You do not have to churn yourself just because the external world churns around you. Let yourself relax and be carried. She is telling us that people don't want to relax, have trouble relaxing into change. Yes, this is why we encourage trust at this time. We encourage trust and buoyancy. Buoyancy, the things that lift your heart, the things that lift you up. You must lean into those things at this time. You must engage with these things, people, practices, habits, doing at this time. They will keep you buoyant. It is the difference between carrying rocks versus wearing a life vest. The churning remains the same, but for one, the journey is easier. Do not forget your buoyancy. If you are unfamiliar with the things that keep you buoyant, if you have forgotten, if buoyant is a feeling that is unfamiliar for you, now is the time to experiment, to try things you sense may uplift you, and to see which things, people, places, habits, doings, things result in buoyancy. Buoyancy is imperative at a time of churning. This is a time of people coming together. We know it does not look like this is a time of people coming together. The world, the pictures and images and words that are projected to you about this time convey the opposite. They convey a great split among humanity. This is true on one level, but it is this split, this surgence of power seeking that will ultimately bring people together. It is nuanced like that. This is the yin and yang of energy. What ultimately brings you together is the forces trying to divide you. And humanity rising together is something you will see in this coming period. Humanity rising together is a product of the things you see in the world that you do not like, the energies you see in the world that do not speak to your heart. You will gather with others, you will raise your frequency, and you will connect as people. This will happen. And first, there will be a fracturing. There is no need to fear the fracturing. The fracturing is simply old energy that is coming to a head, a final grasping of power, of darkness, that will last only for a short while before it fades. This is the less pleasant piece. This is the part, the phase that individuals fear. There is no need to fear it. This energy has been around for eons. It has simply been rising to the surface more and more and more. And so the energy is simply more visible than it used to be. But that energy has always existed and wants to continue existing. Ultimately, it will fail over time. Its rising will force people together in unity. Unity is coming, and unity will be a product of this great shift. When you see the horrors, when you see the power fighting in the news, in the world, know that they are one piece, just one piece of this energy. Yes, you can resist this. Yes, you can cry out in support for your fellow humans, but do not give your entire heart to this darker energy. Save some for your own tender heart. Save some of your energy for buoyancy, for connection, for love, for peace. This is how you will move through the coming months and years in community, in love, in peace, in visioning, in inspiration for a different way, a new future, a way that lifts everyone together versus the ladders of structure, the hierarchy of structure that currently exists, benefiting few while keeping many small, many constrained, pushing many down. This turbulence, this churning you are moving through is what takes you to the deeper, wider option, the deeper, wider place where more are lifted, where more rise together. You are leaving this current reality.
Okay, welcome back. So, this churning season we're moving into, I really like that they linked this churning season to some really helpful, loving advice for how to navigate these particular waters. I like that they gave us a couple of different angles for how to navigate this. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 5 or 6 of the main themes here that I noticed in what they were talking about and just like spotlight and maybe unpack some of that stuff, give it a little bit of context. So, they start by talking about the churning energy. And I like the word churning actually because it makes me think of a river or a lake where during periods of calm it might look beautiful and clear, but there's all this like sediment on the bottom. And so churning is something that just brings up all the guck that was there anyway. And my interpretation of what they're saying is that a lot of guck, a lot of stuff that has been there for a long time, a lot of energy globally, as a collective, a lot of stuff that has always been sort of, I guess, sort of like at the foundation of things is just coming up now. So it's not like we're going to be hit out of left field with something that is brand new. It's more like old energy that's always been there is going to be churning and brought to the surface. And there will be some fallout because of that. And I like that they honor and acknowledge the fact that panic is probably going to be the first response to some of the stuff that happens in the coming months. Just to honor that. But they do tell us that trust is an easier way. So I'm going to read a little excerpt here and then speak to it. They say trust is an easier way. Trust is a brighter North Star for change. Trust helps to calm the navigation of change. It may not calm the waters of change. The waters may remain the same, but navigation is easier with trust. We wish to encourage trust at this time. Trust when the outer world at large appears chaotic, appears fractured, appears violent, appears harsh. We encourage trust because it will not be the first response. The first response will be contraction, fear. This is natural, but less helpful. So what they're doing here is they're turning our attention to, it's almost like they're zooming out. They're like, look, things are going to be a little choppy for the next little while. And if we can just zoom out, if you can trust that this is going to carry you somewhere, you will get through it easier versus just sort of like focusing only on the churning. If you zoom in on that, it's going to be harder to navigate. And I believe when they say trust that they're talking about that like deeper, wiser part of ourselves that we all have that can trust the bigger picture. And honestly, the part of us that senses that we need some upheaval, we need some churning as a society, we need to bring up all that junk so we can clear it and do something different. So I really like that they're both acknowledging that we are humans and we will have a fear response to change, as we always do. But that when we notice ourselves in that, what I call in that like sort of like spiky fear place, that we can, instead of placing all of our attention on the chaos, the churning in the outer world, turn a focus inside to that deeper, wiser place and trust that the churning is leading us somewhere. Okay? So another thing I noticed that they talked about was sort of like the connection between trust and surrender. So I'm just going to read another little excerpt here. Surrendering to change is sometimes perceived as passive. We suggest that surrender is a deeply active undertaking. It is the undertaking of release. Why release in change? Release allows one to be more fluid, to be carried by the current of change instead of fight it. You will be carried. We repeat, you will be carried. Do not fight the current. The current is working in your favor. You fear drowning, but the current is working in your favor. Allow yourself to flow with this change. You know, I've never thought of surrender as an active process, and I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, because really in a time of churning, what surrender requires us to do is like actively focus on like relaxing into the change, which it's not going to be our natural first response. So I think that's why they're saying that it's a deeply active process. For months and months now, I have been talking about how agility is going to be the new stability, particularly for these times that we're moving into. Like I've even been talking about this with my career change clients. I've been talking about this on my Careergasm podcast. It is a huge theme that I just sense very strongly we need to lean into. It's a skill we need to practice, is surrender and agility and flowing with the way things are for the next little while. And so my sense is what they're saying here is to hold things lightly for the next little while. If we get too rigid or graspy about clinging to the current systems, ways, expectations, it is going to be harder for us to navigate this season of change and this season of turmoil. And so I think what they're asking us to do here and suggesting will be more helpful for us is to, okay, honor that that's not our first response, right? Like, honor the fact that we're going to feel contracted at first. And when we notice that, intentionally practice trust and surrender as an active process, because we will need to be quite intentional about that as the world churns outside of us. And I thought that was a really practical and loving take on this season that we're moving into. So it's almost like they're giving us a little bit of reassurance here as well, right? They say, do not fear this mention of churning waters, for churning waters carry you to something much wider and deeper, as all churning waters do. So this suggestion that we're moving to something wider and deeper, to me, I sense very strongly that that means that this turbulent period is necessary for us to move into a better, more expansive state as individuals. But really, I sense what they're talking about here is some collective stuff, and they get into that a bit later. You know, as they're talking about the churning, this word buoyancy came up. And like, I remember when I channel, it's almost like I'm sitting in the back seat, like just sort of like watching where it's going. And this word buoyancy came up. And I kind of almost caught myself being like, oh my God, like, how are we going to be talking about buoyancy during a time of turbulence? Like, people aren't going to want to hear that we should just be buoyant. But they really went into it. And it was a really important piece of this channel. So I'm going to read an excerpt again. They say buoyancy is a more desirable state to be in when the waters churn. Yes, this phase of change feels turbulent, feels chaotic. You can feel the churning. You do not have to join the churning. You do not have to churn yourself just because the external world churns around you. This is why we encourage buoyancy at this time. The things that lift your heart. You must engage with these things, people, practices, habits, doings at this time. They will keep you buoyant. It is the difference between carrying rocks versus wearing a life vest. The churning remains the same, but for one, the journey is easier. Do not forget your buoyancy. Buoyancy is imperative at a time of churning. Imperative is a big word, right? So they're really giving us something to hold on to here. And almost like telling us how to elevate ourselves during this time with the things, people, practices, habits, and doings, activities that will lift our hearts. They say this is important. And really what I think they're talking about here is like maintenance of your personal energy. So like a good question to ask yourself, and honestly one I've been asking myself a lot lately, is where are you investing your energy? You know, I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and I was telling her how I've started thinking about spending my energy like spending dollars. It's like if you have 10 energy dollars in a given day, it's like actively deciding where you want to invest and spend those energy dollars. And to like notice how the things, people, places, activities you engage with actually make you feel. I've noticed some changes for me that I needed to like notice and adapt. I'll give you a silly little example. There's an incredible, beautiful TV show that I love called The Bear, and I've been watching the second season of it, but I started to notice my nervous system would feel like pretty dysregulated after watching a couple of episodes, because there's like a lot of like drama and there's a lot of like tense feelings in that show. So here's this show that like cerebrally I really appreciate and like, but I notice that it's having this impact on my nervous system and my body, and like that kind of hangs around for a while after I watch it. So like I'm just not watching it right now. It doesn't mean that it's not a fantastic show. I mean, clearly it is. It's like this huge Emmy nominated show, but I'm noticing that my energy is impacted when I do that. So that's a very simple example of an activity where I just noticed how I felt about something. What's probably more important as an example is like noticing how you feel when you engage with different people. There might be some people in your life who are lovely humans, but you find that they either deplete you or they stress you out, or you take on some sort of energy that isn't super great for you. Like they don't exactly fill you up, these interactions with these folks. Well, that's something to pay attention to at this time and adjust accordingly. If you want to maintain your energy, if you want to lean into finding your buoyancy in this time, as we will need to in the coming weeks and months. Similarly, I think they get into this a little bit later, but they like even just paying attention to what kind of information you take in and how that makes you feel. How much time are you watching the news, following the news? The news really only has one frequency and it's pretty low. It's one thing to be informed. It's another thing to sort of like stay in that churning energy. Like you can be pretty informed by like literally just scrolling through the headlines in 5 minutes versus returning to your news apps multiple times a day versus sort of wrapping yourself in that particular frequency. So I think the advice here is sort of like twofold. I think it's like pouring your energy into things that lift your heart, as they say, and that could be activities, people, places, whatever. I mean, nature is such a refuge for me. That is something I'm going to be leaning into more. But also noticing when your energy is negatively impacted and making some adjustments. And you're really the only one who can do that. So you have to be intentional about it, and you're the only one who's responsible for your own energy. So I think it's a good message. Now, they talk about how people are going to rise together in the future. They talk about unity, which is such a beautiful message. And it's a nuanced message. So I'm going to read you another little excerpt here. They say humanity rising together is something you will see in this coming period. We know it does not look like a time of people coming together. The world and the pictures and images and words that are projected to you about this time convey the opposite. They convey a great split among humanity. This is true on one level, but it is this split, this surgence of power seeking, that will ultimately bring people together. What ultimately brings you together is the forces trying to divide you. Humanity rising together is a product of the things you see in the world that you do not like, that do not speak to your heart. You will gather with others, you will raise your frequency, and you will connect as people. This will happen. It's interesting, when they said this will happen, that felt like a bit of an underscore for me. Like sometimes they repeat something twice or they say something with emphasis, and I've started to pay attention to that. I think the reason they're telling us about this future rising together is because, as they say, like we're not going to feel like this is our future when we're in the churning. Like the world around us over the next couple months is not going to have like a kumbaya vibe. It's going to be quite turbulent. And so I think what's happening here is, again, they're helping us to zoom out, to understand, I think, the context for the period of time that we're entering. Because humanity rising together sounds harmonic on the surface, right? But actually, my strong sense is that it's revolution energy. And I think that's what we're talking about here with the churning. It's revolution energy, and revolutions are not calm periods of history. But they're also giving us a light at the tunnel by saying, like, listen, you do have a period in the future where humanity will be rising together. However, and they say, first there will be a fracturing. There is no need to fear the fracturing. The fracturing is simply old energy that is coming to a head, a final grasping of powers of darkness that will last for a short while before it fades. This is the less pleasant piece. This is the part, the phase that people fear. There is no need to fear it. This energy has been around for eons. It has simply been rising more and more and more, and the energy is simply more visible than it used to be. But that energy has always existed and wants to continue existing. Ultimately, it will fail over time. Unity is coming, and unity will be a product of this great shift. So, and that sort of gets back to the word they use, which is churning, right? And that idea of things that have always been there, like the sediment on the bottom, just get churning and coming up to the surface, right? So my sense is that this period is going to take us somewhere where instead of trusting the old, I could use a lot of adjectives, instead of using the outdated systems that we have relied on for a long time to, quote, take care of us, I sense we're moving into a period where we're going to realize that those aren't working, and there's going to be a period of a takedown, and that means we're going to learn how to take care of each other. So the churning and the fracturing is actually a catalyst for this new way of doing things. And in order to get to the new way, we have to move first through this period of fracturing. So during this period of fracturing, they talk about how important it is to tend to your heart. And, you know, they're very intentional to say this fracturing, this churning period is just one part of this energy. So I'm going to read something to you here. They say, do not give your entire heart to this darker energy. Save some for your own tender heart. Save some of your energy for buoyancy, for connection, for love, for peace. This is how you will move through the coming months and years, in community, in love, in peace, in visioning, in inspiration for a different way, a new future, a way that lifts everyone together versus the ladders of structure, the hierarchy of structure that currently exists, benefiting few while keeping many small, many constrained, pushing many down. So to me, that feels pretty solidly and pretty strongly like this churning period is ultimately taking us to a necessary takedown, a loving takedown, moving us towards something where we're going to create greater equity somehow. And that maintenance of our personal energy is very important during this time of destabilization when things are shifting, because the energies that would like that to not happen kind of rely on us being caught up in the tornado of the drama of everything and caught up in fear. And so, yes, we will have some fear and we will dip in and out of fear, but returning to self, tending to your heart, maintaining your own energy is going to be something that's really important during this period. And in the future, I will certainly be sharing some visions, some sort of like meditative, experiences that you can return to when you are noticing that you're spiraling in that fear place. And then they say, when they finish, they say, this turbulence, this churning you're moving through is what takes you to the deeper, wider option. The deeper, wider place where more are lifted, where more rise together. And so that's lovely. And so here again, after everything they've said, they put that into context for us, right? They say the loving heads up about what we're moving into in the coming months, and then they help us zoom out and see that this is ultimately a good thing. It's not going to feel good while we're in it, but we're moving somewhere better. And in order for us to move somewhere better, we have to get rid of the shit that's in the way, the stuff that has been keeping people down, and the stuff that is benefiting very few people at the expense of many, many people. And so they're really encouraging this zooming out instead of staying in what they call a myopic view, which is really just focusing on the turbulence right now. If we can sort of acknowledge the turbulence and see that it's a part of a bigger picture, that's going to be very helpful for us moving forward. So again, one of the things I notice with these messages I get is that very often it's like a combination of a loving heads up about something and some reassurance. And the reassurance typically comes in context. It's much easier to digest this information, and it will actually be much easier for us to move through this if we are able to keep in mind the context and that zoomed out, that wider perspective of what we're moving into. So I hope you found this helpful. If you are not yet a member of my Psychic Normies community and you would like to join so you can get more messages like this and, more tools and reassurance as we move through this interesting period of time, the link is right here for you to sign up. Thank you for joining me for this, and I will see you next time.